For some reason, that whenever I say refilling, I always want to say refueling. So now I'm picturing Heidegger having a like a Mountain Dew Baja Blast, and he's refueling the concept of the thing, and it's like one of those 90s commercials, like, whoa, I'm the thing, I'm going skateboarding, dude. That was that was cringe. Mike's still muted. What's up? Hey everybody, how's it going? We're gonna do more Origin of the Work of Art. So before we start, well, I was gonna say I'm still figuring out a little bit how I want to do this, because, and the reason that I'm still figuring out how I want to do this is that the point of it, as I see it, is for me to read it live and also for chat to interact live. So it's essentially like a reading group, a kind of bizarro Twitch version of a reading group. The only thing I was noticing as I'm doing it is that, I know this essay fairly well, but there are still thorny parts in it, and it's a little bit at times difficult to work through a difficult passage while also paying attention to the chat. So I'm considering somewhat prepping before, maybe even up to the point of actually writing out like mini lectures, but I decided not to do that because I just don't think that's not what I want. That's not the goal, is me explaining the text, right? It's a reading group as I see it. But I did go back through some of the things I did last time and clarified some things on my own. So before I get started picking up where we left off, I just want to run through a few things from last time. So I actually should be on that in the PDF. So this is something that when I reread it after stream, it was actually really clear. I kept getting confused last time from this paragraph where Heidegger says, "The stone in the road is a thing, as is the clod in the field. A jug is a thing, as is the well beside the road. But what about the milk in the jug and the water in the well? These two are things. If the cloud in the sky and the thistle in the field, the leaf in the autumn breeze, and the hawk over the wood are rightly called by the name of thing. All these must indeed be called things, if the name is applied even to that which does not, like those just enumerated, show itself, i.e., that which does not appear. According to Kant, the whole of the world, for example, and even God himself, is a thing of this sort, a thing that does not itself appear, namely, a thing in itself. In the language of philosophy, both things in themselves and things that appear, all beings that in any way are called things." Now, the reason that I was getting tripped up on that is partially just grammatically. Here, when he says, if the name is applied even to that which does not, like those just enumerated, show itself, I thought he was saying, just like these things which don't appear, or don't show themselves, also God doesn't show himself. But it's literally the opposite. It's unlike these things which do appear, God does not appear. And the point, and this is what I realized, because this is actually a pretty important point. So it was a rather big miss to breeze by this. I was just so confused last time. If you watched last time, I was like, why? How does the hawk over the wood not appear? But the hawk does appear. the point is that, throughout all the way from, at this point, it looks like there's still some of that optimism. I said that stressed that very weirdly. Optimism about Greek philosophy, whereas by his later years, even that Heidegger is kind of skeptical about. But at the very least, in the translation from Greek thought into Latin, Heidegger thinks something has gone seriously wrong, and in a certain sense, Kant is like the ultimate culmination of that mistake. And that's the point here, right? Thing has been basically emptied of any meaningfulness. This is the, Husserlian phenomenologist part of Heidegger, the get back to the things themselves. You should be using, and I love that he uses the word concrete. I said this during the Being in Time stream, just because I think concrete is just a word that it's such a better word than like material or real, because those are so loaded words that are loaded with all kinds of philosophical baggage. But concrete, it just means make it concrete, not abstract. Concrete in your face. The point is that you see, right, and this is the kind of process that's happened as the concrete experiences that ancient Greek philosophers had when they first not even really invented these concepts. I think Heidegger would say had these concepts revealed to them. Once those were canonized down as tradition rather than, in Rome, Roman philosophers inventing their own concepts, and then everyone in the Western tradition since, instead of inventing their own concepts that were based on their own concrete life experiences, rather being this abstract philosophical legacy, is how you end up with thing being basically so meaningless that even God, or something that doesn't appear at all, that doesn't show itself, is called a thing. It turns out, right, that there is not even any positive definition of thing anymore, Heidegger says. Right here. On the whole, the word thing here designates whatever is not simply nothing. It can only be defined negatively. The only thing a thing is that which is not nothing. And I was wondering if, I don't know Parmenides very well, but I mean, that to me sounds like the all which is being, so there can be no non-being, or something like that. If that's a fair characterization. I don't necessarily trust any interpretation that I got just from, general knowledge or grand philosophical overviews, because those tend to be spurious. But if that is an accurate representation of Parmenides, it kind of sounds like him there. But thing is literally so meaningless, and even he goes to say that death too is a thing, right? In a weird way, death is like the nothing or becoming nothing, but it's still the concrete experience of nothingness. So it's a thing, right? Thing has become so emptied out of content that even things which do not appear count as things. But obviously, Heidegger's going to walk it back to wanting to, reappropriate the meaning of thing and make thing concrete again. And the way that Heidegger wants to do that is to focus on the concrete nature of things specifically, not in general things, but things. And by saying on the nature of things, I made it sound like Lucretius, which is not really, but to de-abstractify was what I wanted to say, which I don't think is a word, is to focus things back at least to that which appears. But of course, eventually he works down to the mere thing, right? And so there's two things that need to be pointed out. One is that definition of thing is not adequate for Heidegger because, like I just said, it's so broad to be literally meaningless. If a thing just means everything which is not simply nothing, then it's an essentially meaningless definition. Like I was saying, I think last time, there's an Aristotelian sense in this also, right? The way Aristotle says, being cannot have any definition in the sense of the way everything else has definitions in terms of genera and species, because those require splitting. Those require knowing what something is and what something's not. And of course, if being is supposed to capture everything, then there can be no other than it. So it doesn't make sense to define being in those terms. This is like the reverse of that, in the sense that thing is being defined that way, but that's bad, right? That if we want a thingly quality of things, then we have to understand what makes things and why it's interesting because I have to use the word thing as I say it, but other types of things are not things, right? And so he goes through with an argument that I was thinking about this as I was reading it. Is he just doing the thing that we complain about some strands of analytic philosophy for doing, of just basically having intuitions? Or is there some stronger argument for why he says we do call God a thing, but it feels wrong to call God a thing? He says we hesitate to call God a thing. And that does basically just sound like an intuition argument. It doesn't seem right to call God a thing. But you could, in the sense that he gives mere thing as a definition, and emphasizes the etymology of mere as purely what it is, that maybe there's something beyond just intuition and something logical there, in the sense that to say God is a mere thing couldn't be right, because the thingly quality would just be one kind of component within God, right? And then also he gives the example of people. We could say that humans are things, although I think Heidegger doesn't agree with that, but he's right now considering it, but then saying at least there has to be something else over and above thing. And that would be the example of the endless attempts to define the human in Western philosophy, that are like the human is the rational thing, or the human is the social thing, or whatever, right? There's another term being added to thing. So they must, at the very least, even if they are things, they're not mere things, right? So if we abstract to what is a thing and only a thing, if we get down to that, what would be, we could access the thingly character of the thing, because we wouldn't accidentally muddy up, also the rational thing. We wouldn't get the rationality muddied up with the thingliness inside of the rational thing. And so that's why he works down to the mere thing. So that's just something that I wanted to clarify from last time, because it was obvious rereading it, but this is something that I'll figure out, or we can figure out together as we go through this, how much I should prepare or not, because I do really like the idea and want to keep it to an extent of it really just being, I have read this essay before, but having it be just a live encounter with the text. And again, not just for me, also for the chat, because I'm, in the dream version of this, hopefully we can get there someday. People are chatting and, both responding to me and even to each other about interpretations of the text. I'm thinking of this as a reading group via Twitch, a perverse Twitch reading group. But I'll see, because like I said last time, I got hung up on that sentence, and it just wasn't clear until I was looking at it after that's what he meant by things that do not appear. So we'll see. So I did a little bit more prep this time. It's not completely raw going in, but we'll see. So anyway, so where we left off, right? We know that we're defining mere things, right? And we've pushed down mere things to exclude anything which has life, and also to exclude artifacts, right? Things that are, could be called created things or formed things, or anything that, an artifact is something made by a human, basically. Whether that's a hammer or a chair or pottery or whatever. The mere thing, he gives examples like clod of dirt, block of granite, right? And it's important that it's a block of granite, right? Because it's before the sculptor has formed it. And then he says that our definitions of things, right? He has made this argument at the beginning of this essay and elsewhere, including in Being and Time, that essentially against common sense, right? Which is something that already Kant says, which is kind of an attack on Thomas Reid and that common sense school of philosophy. Basically saying things which seem like common sense, which is to say seem given or natural or just obviously true, in fact, at some point in history, this appeared to someone. And at the moment it did, it seemed strange and shocking and new. It got passed down through history and then became, in certain cases, so ingrained in culture and in the general cultural understanding and intellectual culture that it almost seemed as if it just came from nowhere. But at least according to Heidegger, no, that doesn't happen. At some point, you can trace any idea back to the moment it first emerged, first appeared to someone, right? And that's, I'm using that language, first appeared to someone, because he emphasizes, it would be interesting to think about how similar this is or isn't to like Deleuze's idea of concept creation. But I think there would at least have to be a difference, because concept creation, I don't know Deleuze that well, sorry if I'm screwing this up. Concept creation sounds a little too agentive, but then again, I know that Deleuze is not really into agency, so ignore Deleuze. The point is that for Heidegger, I use the word appearing because it happens to someone. There's an event, which is Ereignis, where that concept emerges, but it's not that, someone sits down and comes up with it. Someone has to be there to have that experience, but that experience isn't just someone creating it out of their genius mind. It's an event that happens at a confluence of historical factors. But anyway, so the point is, okay, so we know what we're after is mere things. We want to define what makes the block of granite or the clod of dirt what it is. And the best way to do that, instead of just looking at our common sense assumptions, is to go back to, the source. Heidegger thinks of a lot of our ideas, especially about things and kind of philosophical questions like that, to their origins in ancient Greece. And he says 3 main definitions inherited from ancient Greek thought. And last time we went over the first 2. The first one is the this one right here, the to hypokamenon view, which is basically the view of the thing as the substance, which is the bearer of properties. So the weird thing is that kind of all 3 of these to me sound like they could be from Aristotle, but that's probably just because I don't know ancient Greek thought well enough. But this first one, you could also think, he's saying it comes from ancient Greek thought, but you could also totally think of it as, Locke's view, which it literally is this, right? The primary and secondary qualities, right? That what a thing is the substance, which is not the kind of secondary accidental qualities on top of it, the accidentals. It's just the thing as it is in itself. And Heidegger suggests that this seems so obvious. For instance, it also seems obvious in our language, right? You have like the noun, and then you have the adjectives that you apply to it. But this is where Heidegger really introduces the idea of what I was just talking about, saying this seems obvious, but in fact, there was someone in ancient Greece, is where he locates it, who first had this concept of being as presence, he says, right, of present to you as a thing which has accidental qualities in ancient Greece. And he explains what it is and then why it's wrong, right? And the biggest reason, which ends up being the reason that all three of these, one of the reasons that all three of these are wrong, is that it's not specific enough, right? We're looking at a thing that could talk about the mere thing specifically and emphasize what makes the clod of dirt or the block of granite different from the hammer, different from the human being, different from the cat or any animal, different from God. And this actually is so indiscriminate, it could apply to any of these fields. So it's uselessly broad. The other problem is that it's way too abstract. Heidegger, in fact, says it does a certain violence to the mere thing, right? It's just totally abstract, right? Substance as the bearer of properties. If you go out and sit on the ground and dig dirt out of your hand and feel it and see it and have a concrete encounter with it, none of what the to use an analytic-y type word, none of the perceptual content of that experience is in any way captured by the phrase substance that is the bearer of properties. Nothing about that begins to in any way speak to, in a vivid, meaningful way, to what it's like to hold a clod of dirt in your hands. And that's part of Heidegger's general kind of phenomenological critique, all the way from Being in Time and earlier, that this kind of critique of the philosophical position where you're sitting in the armchair, not out in the world interacting with the things that you're discussing, right? You're sitting at a distance reflecting on, what is dirt, but you're never actually picking up dirt and looking at it and things like that. It would be a whole other discussion to explain all the reasons that is, but that's in Being in Time. So there's Being in Time videos on the YouTube channel from when we started it. We haven't finished yet, but we'll be back soon once we finish this essay. But that's all in there. Then the second one is the aistheton, right? Which is what page is that? Which is obviously, I think at least the same, the root of the word aesthetics, which in addition to, aesthetics being about art, it's also, for instance, in Kant, when we're talking about the transcendental aesthetic, you're talking about the, direct pressing on your senses, empirical quality. This is the opposite in the sense of the kind of, the first view could also be called a rationalist view in a lot of ways. And this view is essentially a hard empiricist view. The thing just is the sum total of the sensuous experiences by which it presents itself to someone. So the dirt just is all the ways that if you smell it, touch it, taste it, see it, listen to it. What, that's the fifth sense. Any, the whole sensuous manifold of that is what the dirt is. It's what the thing is. And, he says that this avoids the assault upon the thing that he was, or the violence on the thing that he was talking about in the first view, where you basically completely destroy its thingly character and turn it into an abstraction, right? It is having a direct encounter with the dirt, but it also ends up destroying the thing because, it's like the critique you could make of Hume, or certainly that Kant kind of does make of Hume, right? That when you're having sensations, you don't have a sensation just like red patch here now. You have a sensation, and we can just use Heidegger's examples. I'll read them. We never really first perceive a throng of sensations, e.g. tones and noises, in the appearance of things, as this thing concept alleges. Rather, we hear the storm whistling in the chimney, we hear the three-motored plane, we hear the Mercedes in immediate distinction from the Volkswagen. Much closer to us than all sensations are the things themselves. We hear the door shut in the house and never hear acoustical sensations or even mere sounds. In order to hear a bare sound, we have to listen away from things, divert our ear from them, i.e., listen abstractly. So, I think that's fairly clear, actually, but when you hear, you don't just hear it too, despite it trying to avoid philosophical abstraction, is a philosophical abstraction, because you don't hear and say, oh, I'm hearing the vibration at X frequency. You say, oh, I'm hearing a Volkswagen. When you have a perception of a thing, a sensuous perception, you have immediately a concept of it as a thing, right? You don't just, hear, okay, that's some brown patches, and here's some green patches, and here's the outline. Oh, that's a mountain. You add it all up, right? Rather, it's a gestalt view. This is what Heidegger. That's essentially what Heidegger's arguing for, which is fairly phenomenological, obviously. You see the thing as a whole in the first moment of encounter, right? It's a gestalt encounter with the thing. And so that's ends up being his argument against it, that it's too abstract and therefore destroys the thing the other way, right? The first one destroys the thing by pushing it too far away. The second one destroys it by pulling it too close to your face. I was giving an example last time of, if you put a painting too close to your face, the image disappears and it just turns into chipped paint on the canvas. That's kind of an example of what this would mean, what's going on here. And so he ends up critiquing it for that reason, and also for the same reason as the other one. I could touch, my friend and see all five senses of them, right? There's nothing about this definition that specifically points out what makes the clod of dirt a clod of dirt, right? It just, again, just like the first definition, it applies to everything indiscriminately and cannot pick out specifically the mere thing. And then that leads into, that's all the warm-up. Maybe I shouldn't do that every single time, or it's going to take forever to get started. But that's the warm-up we've been so far. Where we left off is getting started on the third thing, third definition of the thing, which is the hylae morphe. Sorry if that's it's Greek pronunciation, I'm not sure. But the form and matter distinction, which is definitely the Aristotle definition. So I'm going to get some water, and then we'll get going on that. Okay, so we'll start here, which is where we left off. Actually, let's start here because that has a little bit of useful information for the lead-in to the third definition of the thing. Okay. And I have it is up on screen, but I'm reading off my physical copy. So again, we're starting here in the thing concept. I'm just going to read this paragraph and maybe also the next one, so that we can have some room to get going on this. In the thing concept just mentioned, there is not so much an assault upon the thing as rather an inordinate attempt to bring it into the greatest possible proximity to us. But a thing never reaches that position as long as we assign it as its thingly feature what is perceived by the senses. Whereas the first interpretation keeps the thing at arm's length from us, as it were, and sets it too far off, the second makes it press too physically upon us. In both interpretations, the thing vanishes. It is therefore necessary to avoid the exaggerations of both. The thing itself must be allowed to remain in its self-containment. It must be accepted in its own steadfastness. This the third interpretation seems to do, which is just as old as the first two. Right, so this third one, it seems at least, is going to be better than the first two because it allows the thing to have its self-containment. The second one brings it too close and it's no longer contained in itself because it's just dispersed into various sensuous interpretation or sensuous experiences. And the first, it pushes it too far away and kind of subverts it or dominates it under this concept of an all-prevailing rational definition, right? Where rational here refers to specifically a particular understanding of the word ratio in Latin, right? So that's what Heidegger means when he means rational, and not just in general thinking well. That which gives things their constancy and pith, but is also at the same time the source of their particular mode of sensuous pressure, colored, resonant, hard, massive, Heidegger's horny, is the matter in things. Right, so constancy and pith is what is being lost in the second interpretation because they're too there's no constancy. It's just diffused into various sensuous experiences. But what is preserved, which is lost in the first example, is the particular mode of sensuous pressure. Colored, resident, hard, massive, which is, those could be examples for anything, but I think he's still specifically talking about the block of granite here. In the analysis of this thing as matter, highly, Greek word, form, morphe, again Greek word, is already co-posited. Right, so I guess to posit matter, actually, even without saying it, is already to co-posit form as its opposite, which always appears alongside it. What is constant in a thing, its consistency, lies in the fact that matter stands together with a form. The thing is formed matter. right? So that's another way of saying why they're coposited, because what the thing is formed matter. It's not just that there is matter, but that matter is formed into a shape. Well, that would be one way it could be formed, or one dimension of the forming in addition to shape. This interpretation appeals to the immediate view with which the thing solicits us by its outward appearance, eidos. So that's the Greek word that is often translated as, well, it's translated different ways sometimes, but it could be form, it could be idea, and Rodolphe Gachet, interestingly, says it should be translated as look. I don't know Greek well enough to, ancient Greek well enough to say, well, I don't know it at all. But that's interesting if so, right? There's a kind of less philosophically abstract, direct, concrete meaning of eidos, right? It's the direct way that something appears intelligibly in visual perception or something like that, which is interesting, right? But it could be idea, could be form. This interpretation appeals to the immediate view with which a thing solicits us by its outward appearance, and I guess also, basically Heidegger is translating it here as outward appearance. It's the appearing is its eidos, or how it appears outwardly, which could be related also to look. It sounds a little bit like look, more so even, I would say, than idea or form. In this synthesis of matter and form, a thing concept has finally been found which applies equally to things of nature and to utensils. So he was talking about that earlier. I think he said that the mere thing ultimately will focus on the clod of dirt, but that a utensil would also apply. And I assume by utensil he just means any kind of man-made tool, but I'm not 100% sure about that. So I just want to, for a second, make sure there's nothing hidden here. This interpretation appeals to the immediate view, right? So one interpretation of that sentence is the immediate view in the sense of the commonsensical view, or like the most popular view. But another would be immediate, which is to say not mediated. And I think that it is the second one that I just said, that it's leaning towards, that there's some sense that what is the reason that this view in particular is better than the other two views is that it appeals directly to the way the thing solicits us, right? So the thing is kind of showing, well, soliciting is an interesting word to use here. But the thing is showing itself to us, or well, let's quickly check the why can't I type all of a sudden? The etymologies of solicit. So the etymology is agitate, anxious, set in motion. So that's kind of interesting. So the thing solicits us. It sets us in motion in terms of the unveiling of itself. I mean, it's interesting that the artwork ends up to spoiler the essay, the artwork ends up being defined as what sets to work the truth of being, right? Which is potentially a kind of soliciting based on that etymology. This interpretation appeals to the immediate view with which a thing solicits us by its outward appearance. But also, the basic definition is just ask for or try to attain something from someone. So, I mean, yeah, I guess it has that kind of I don't read the text reads me kind of quality. The thing solicits us. It reaches out to us, and this interpretation allows that to happen by its outward appearance, by the way it appears to us. So yeah, I mean, appearance is the way it shows itself from itself as itself. So that's why this third view seems to be better and seems to not do a violence to the thing. Okay. And I think what it means to say equally to things of nature and to utensils is that it's able to describe them without privileging utensils while still capturing the thingliness of the thing. I guess because it's not immediately clear to me why this is better than the other ones at capturing the unique thingliness. But I guess it would be that you could pay attention to the way specific matter is formed unique to each thing. And it would avoid the concerns of the second one because the idea of matter and form still is a whole, so it's not reduced to individual particularities. And I guess why it would be better than the first one is that there's no like hidden thing in itself or hidden substance or hidden core that we don't have access to. I think is what would be meant there. But at least at this point, it's not completely clear to me why this version is better. But let's keep reading it. It might become clear as we read more. This concept puts us in a position to answer the question concerning the thingly element in the work of art. The thingly element is manifestly the matter of which it consists. Matter is the substrate and field for the artist's formative action. But we could have advanced this obvious and well-known definition of the thingly element at the very outset. Why do we make a detour through other applicable thing concepts? Because we also mistrust the concept of thing, which represents it as formed matter. So this is a sort of classic Heideggerism, where we're on the way path to thought, where he's going to lead us to all these definitions and then in the end throw them all away anyway. But the thingly element is manifestly the matter of which it consists. I guess I guess maybe what makes the nature and the utensils equal actually is that they both come from matter. But whereas the mere thing is unformed, this concept puts us in a position to answer the question concerning the thingly element. Well, I mean, the work of art, it's clear enough, right? The matter of the artwork is the canvas and the oils or whatever in the paint, and then the form is the way that the artist's formative action. Well, matter is the substrate. But I guess I'm thinking of the clod of dirt as being formed, like by God or by processes of nature or something. This might be. I need to take a quick break at some point, and this might be the place to do it, just so I can figure out what is meant here instead of getting caught on this forever, like I did on the why nothing appears sentence that I did last time. Or if you have ideas in the chat, feel free to pop them in there. This interpretation appeals to the immediate view with which the thing solicits. So I get that. We went over that. In this synthesis of matter and form, a thing concept has finally been found which applies equally to things of nature and to utensils. I wish there should be another sentence here. There needs to be another sentence after this explaining why it applies equally. So it's slightly frustrating. That which you things. What is constant in a thing, its consistency, lies in the fact that matter stands together with a form. All right, well, that didn't help. So, I spent a second with it. Well, the break time with it. In fact, a little bit longer than I was planning on doing. I think it might. I mean, I would hesitate to make any rash pronouncements this quickly, but my feeling is that this might just be something that Heidegger overlooked. But at the same time, it's obviously on average going to be more likely that I overlooked something than that Heidegger did. So that's worth keeping in mind. But obviously Heidegger can't overlook things, and maybe he just did. But I think what he would mean is that I have a really hard sense of understanding why formed matter applies only to things. Especially since, I don't know Aristotle that well, but if I'm right, doesn't Aristotle even speak of humans as formed matter? So it just seems like this third interpretation does not avoid the issues of the first interpretation. Unless it's possible that we just keep reading, and it turns out that Heidegger accuses of this. But it seems at this point that he seems to be saying it's okay. I don't know. Anyway, I think the solution is that we just have to keep reading. But if Heidegger does end up, accusing it of applying to things indiscriminately, then our wondering this wouldn't have been a mistake, or like we should have just kept reading. It would have been, actually ideal, because when you ask these kinds of questions in advance, and then the philosopher addresses that concern 2 pages later, rather than just reading about it and being like, yeah, okay, this is not important, I got the main idea, you actually are able to understand why those counter arguments are raised. So I always think it's good to do that. Let's just keep reading. But yeah, at this point, I'm just not clear on why formed matter as the third interpretation of the thing avoids the overly general definition of thingliness that the other two fall foul of. But I understand what's different about it. I'm also not clear on what the forming is exactly. Does forming mean? I'm taking it to mean anything which has a form, I guess, which is why it seems to apply to basically everything, at least everything that appears. But then it seems like it would apply to humans, say, or anything that has life, which we've said is not what a thing is. This concept puts us in a position to answer the question concerning the thingly element in the work of art. But yeah, I mean, it makes sense anyway for art, which is, matter is the substrate or the field, possibility field in which the artist's formative action takes place. But we know already at this point, despite the fact that Heidegger's just said that this is the best of the three definitions, that we also mistrust this concept of the thing. So even that is going to end up being challenged and essentially taken out to pasture, so to speak. Okay, wow. We're not even... We're an hour in and we're still essentially where we were when we ended last time. Oh, that's okay. We're going deep. All right. But is not precisely this pair of concepts, matter-form, usually employed in the domain in which we are supposed to be moving? To be sure, that it's getting a little dark, so I'm going to put my physical copy away, and I'll just read along on the PDF also. Why do we make a detour through other applicable thing concepts? Because we also mistrust this concept of the thing, which represents it as formed matter. I think the reason... I don't think it's obviously intelligible why, because we distrust this definition of the thing, we also need to run through the other ones. But I think that what Heidegger means there is that being able to see why the other two fail will help us to see how this third, supposedly better one also fails. And again, saying, why didn't we start this one? Because definitely, I mean, obviously it's still true today, the form and matter, or form and content. Well, actually, form and content is different than form and matter. Form and matter binary is still to this day kind of a prevailing model for understanding artwork. But is not precisely this pair of concepts, matter-form, usually employed in the domain in which we are supposed to be moving? Employed in the domain in which we are supposed to be moving is a very indirect way of saying what I just said, right? It's isn't matter-form usually how we describe artworks? To be sure, the distinction of matter and form is the conceptual schema which is used in the greatest variety of ways, quite generally, for all art theory and aesthetics. This incontestable fact, however, proves neither that the distinction of matter and form is adequately founded, nor that it belongs originally to the domain of art and the artwork. Right, so we already know that we shouldn't trust common sense or tradition just because it's supposedly the best way to it, or it's how it's been done, doesn't mean it's the best way to do it. That's why that doesn't prove it. And also, I mean, I guess it doesn't belong originally to the domain of art and the artwork because its roots are actually in Greek philosophy, Heidegger's saying. But maybe also that it's not the originating domain of art and the artwork. Moreover, the range of application of this pair of concepts has long extended far beyond the field of aesthetics. Form and content are the most hackneyed concepts under which anything and everything may be subsumed. And if we talk about form matter all the time. It's a hackneyed, overdone concept. It's the epitome of that concept that has been dragged through history in an encrusted, decaying husk shell of a form. And if form is correlated with the rational and matter with the irrational, if the rational is taken to be the logical and the irrational the alogical, if in addition the subject-object relation is coupled with the conceptual pair form-matter, then representation has at its command a conceptual machinery that nothing is capable of withstanding. Right, so I talked about this a little bit last time, and I think I did a well enough job that time, but right, that's, this is like, and it's an important critique in, say, feminist studies, where, the rational is also associated, or the form is also associated with the rational, which is associated with the man, and matter with the woman, which is associated with irrational. Right, so there's these terms, form and content, and that's an example of how things get crusted over time in history. All these associations have built up, so you have this tightly knit form is rationality, is masculinity, is, blah, 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 blah. All these things built up over time, over history, that have been to the point that there are these, that's one reason that under which anything and everything may be subsumed, because they have so many associations built up that in a certain way they seem like useful concepts because they can explain so much, but they can only explain by doing a certain violence, in the sense that they can only abstract and connect a collection of terms without, getting to the thingly character of the thing concretely and directly. Right, so also, the subject-object relation, he's saying, is connected here, which is interesting. So I guess subject is aligned with form. I guess so. It's like if you're talking about, say, Kant, or maybe a parody of Kant, a transcendental subject, having objects as its domain, right? There's the kind of the forming subject, right? Or the transcendental subject, which literally gives form to the matter of the world. Then representation has at its command a conceptual machinery that nothing is capable of withstanding. It's interesting because this word representation just shows up here without being discussed before, but I guess I would take it as kind of Kantian representation, or what Derrida will hyphenate to emphasize, representation, the representing of matter in a form that is intelligible for the subject. So literal forming matter that way. So that representation, this process or function of representation, is basically this, endless power of conceptual machinery to subsume everything underneath it. Yeah, so let's keep reading. There are some parts that I'm tempted to do a little more diving into representation, but I think we should keep moving because I have a pretty good sense that what I just said is what Heidegger means by representation. If, however, it is thus with the distinction between matter and form, how then shall we make use of it to lay hold of the particular domain of mere things by contrast with all other entities. So it sounds like maybe he's going to address my question I was just asking earlier, which is why is this one any more particular? Why couldn't this one also just apply to every being? Especially since form and matter have gathered all these associations over time. Couldn't they literally just at this point be applied to anything? I mean, the answer seems to be yes. Or any being, rather. That's what I should be saying instead of anything, is any being. But perhaps this characterization in terms of matter and form would recover its defining power if only we reverse the process of expanding and emptying these concepts. Certainly. But perhaps this characterization in terms of matter and form would recover its defining power if only we reversed the process of expanding and emptying these concepts. Certainly. But this presupposes that we know in what sphere of beings they realize their genuine defining power. That this is the domain of mere things is so far only an assumption. Reference to the copious use made of this conceptual framework in aesthetics might sooner lead to the idea that matter and form are specifications stemming from the essence of the artwork and were in the first place transferred from it back to the thing. Where does the matter-form structure have its origin? In the thingly character of the thing or in the workly character of the artwork? But perhaps this characterization in terms of matter and form would recover its defining power if only we reversed the process of expanding and emptying these concepts. Okay. At first I thought expanding and emptying were close. Basically, it's like what I was just saying. When you expand a concept across a wider and wider domain to apply to more and more beings, the only way you're able to do that is by emptying it, right? Because, the more specific and limited domain that concept attempts to explain, the more concrete particularities that the concept can, pull on or use as a basis to generate its definition. But if as you expand and more beings have to be explained, so to speak, it have less qualities in common that you can pick out, or less features, right, that you can pick out. And I'm sure Heidegger wouldn't like that particular language that I just used, but that's a way to think about it. The more beings that you're talking about in the particular domain, the more abstract and essentially more meaningless your definition has to get to be able to adequately attend to all of the beings that are within that domain. So, so to reverse the process is kind of already, it seems like what Heidegger has begun by pulling thing back to the mere thing, is to reverse it by, what is the opposite of expanding? I guess, shrinking, but I think there's like an actual opposite word, but shrinking the concept back, and therefore, de-emptying it, refilling it. For some reason, that whenever I say refilling, I always want to say refueling. So now I'm picturing Heidegger having a like a Mountain Dew Baja Blast, and he's refueling the concept of the thing, and it's like one of those 90s commercials, like, whoa, I'm the thing, I'm going skateboarding, dude. That was yeah, that was cringe. Whatever. Anyway, so that's what it means to go the opposite of expanding and emptying these concepts. So, and that would be how the characterization in terms of matter and form would recover its defining power. Certainly. So certainly we could do this. Certainly we could shrink the definition of matter and form as a concept back down to a more meaningfully limited definition. But this presupposes that we know in what sphere of beings they realize their genuine defining power, right? So this is that hermeneutic circle we were talking about, or the Platonic question. If you're trying to ask what the thing is, and you take a bunch of things and you say, well, that's a thing, well, that's not a thing. How could you do that if you didn't already know what a thing is? So there's this kind of circular logic involved. That this is the domain of mere things is so far only an assumption. In other words, we could pull the concept of matter and form back to make it to help us realize what things are in terms of the genuine defining power is the mere things. But right, this is the kind of being underway to thought. It's Heidegger saying that's just an assumption. We've assumed that for this moment, but we certainly haven't proven it or established it absolutely in any way. Reference to the copious use made of this conceptual framework in aesthetics might sooner lead to the idea that matter and form are specifications stemming from the essence of the artwork and were in the first place transferred from it back to the thing. In other words, the fact that matter and form is used so often to describe artworks, in fact more so than to describe rocks or clods of dirt, might suggest that that's where it's originally from. It's interesting that these terms have what he's saying is where they have their genuine defining power, which I guess would mean that if it has a genuine defining power, it's not that the definition can't apply to other beings, but its genuine defining power, where the thing where it shows itself, is in the beings in this domain. And so, for example, the beings that are artworks would be originally give the matter form definition, and then one could take that, and maybe we have from that, and apply it to mere things. But if we do that, then we have taken it out of the place where it has its genuine defining power, and we're doing bad metaphysics again. We're abstracting away from the concreteness of things, I think. Where does the matter-form structure have its origin? In the thingly character of the thing, or in the workly character of the artwork? So that leads us to the question, the next question. What, does matter form, does it come from things, or does it come from artworks? Is it from mere things, or from, the works? The self-contained block of granite is something material in a definite, and so I think also that, just wanted to say, that paragraph I think answered my question earlier, which is that form and matter seems like a better way of describing, because you can talk about the matter as, the essence of a thing, the real self-contained presence, but because it's formed matter, because matter is never just matter, it's always formed matter, doing that doesn't turn it into the abstract thing in itself. It's rather, it's rich in sensuous qualities because it's formed matter. And for why that is determined indiscriminately, well, we don't know yet, but Heidegger is suggesting we could try and see if it's the fact that we can and do apply it more broadly might be a mistake that we have made. That's a great error, but that if we brought it back, we could see that the matter and form distinction perhaps applies specifically to things. But that's how we get to the current question. Well, does it apply specifically to mere things, or does it apply specifically to artworks? Okay, so let's keep reading after I take a drink. The self-contained block of granite is something material in a definite, if unshapely, form. Form means here the distribution and arrangement of the material parts in spatial locations, resulting in a particular shape, namely that of a block. So form definitely doesn't have to mean man-made clearly here, right? If there's just like but a block of granite is it could be referred to something cut. But it seems like it's saying, form is just something's having a form, which all things have, even mere things. Form means here the distribution and arrangement of material parts in spatial locations, right? So, and this, I guess this is like a non-Kantian sense, because, this is not form that's supplied by a subject, but that is externally part of the thing, the way it shows itself. But a jug, an axe, a shoe are also matter occurring in a form. And I assume those would all be examples of what he means when he's been talking about utensils, things that are useful for humans, and they also are made by humans. Form as shape is not the consequence here of a prior distribution of the matter. The form, on the contrary, determines the arrangement of the matter. So in that sense, that means that that they're co-positing. Right, it's not just that there was matter and now there's form. It's rather that form and matter are co-occurring. There is matter which is present to you, and that matter has a particular arrangement because of its form. Even more, it prescribes in each, and so like the form, like an axe, that makes perfect sense in terms of like it has to have a handle, it has to be sharp. These certain formal questions are what make it arranged in the way that it is. And maybe you could say, I guess there's like physical laws for why the granite would have to be formed in the way that it is, but that's a question I think we might get answered. How this could still apply to man-made objects. Even more, it prescribes in each case the kind and selection of the matter. Impermeable for a jug, sufficiently hard for an axe, firm yet flexible for shoes. So I basically just said what the next sentence was going to say anyway. The interfusion of form and matter prevailing here is, moreover, controlled beforehand by the purposes served by jug, axe, shoes. Such usefulness is never assigned or added on afterward to a being of the type of a jug, axe, or pair of shoes. but neither is it something that floats somewhere above it as an end. That sort of seems not right to me, because couldn't you discover, thought experiment way, maybe you wouldn't really, but some kind of rock, naturally occurring rock, that's in just the perfect shape to be a jug? And wouldn't it, in that sense, its form would, when it was taken as a jug by a human, wouldn't that be usefulness being assigned after the fact? Even more, it prescribes in each case the kind and selection of the matter. The interfusion of form and matter prevailing here is, moreover, controlled beforehand. Yeah, that I guess that might be a criticism I would have, that it does seem like you could discover something that would function as a jug in nature, and it wouldn't really be wrong to call that a jug, but I'm not sure. To say, but neither is it something that floats somewhere above it as an end, is, I guess, to say also it's not like teleological in like an Aristotelian sense or something. It's not that the jug aspires to its usefulness, I guess. It's rather that the jug is useful, and that's why it's a jug. Its form has central to its meaning its usefulness. I guess that's part of like the tool analysis or being in the world. You don't abstractly reflect on a jug and then it later decide, oh, we could use this, or oh, this has the usefulness for holding liquid. No, it's inherent to the meaning of the jug that it is useful, right? That's actually, since what the jug is matter formed or arranged in a particular way, the meaning of the jug is that it is useful. So, but yeah, I'm still stuck a little bit on that. I'm not 100% convinced, I guess, that the usefulness can't be assigned. I guess you could say it can't be added on, that a jug is a jug. Usefulness is a central feature of it. And maybe that's just the only thing Heidegger means. But I'm just thinking you definitely can pick out objects that weren't intended as jugs and use them as jugs. Which wouldn't it just be the taking as structure? Let's just note that one for the moment, and we'll come back to it. Let's read the next paragraph. If he doesn't have an answer for us in the next paragraph, we might have to go back and try to figure out what's going on there. Usefulness is the basic feature from which this being regards us. That is, flashes at us, and thereby is present, and thus is this being. And so that's kind of what I was talking about. Like, one way to understand this, which is hotly debated in Heidegger scholarship, is to understand present as meaning. Present, meaningfully present to, is the word that Thomas Sheehan uses, which is very controversial for a lot of people. But if it means meaning, that makes sense. And this is that the meaning of the jug is its usefulness. What the jug is that I can hold liquid within it. Use it as an object to hold liquid. And so you don't just abstractly have a thing and then apply the meaningful category of use on top of it. Use is centrally what organizes the jug as jug, is that it can be used to hold liquid and pour liquid, etc. And, importantly, this is not us applying this definition on top of the matter, right? But rather, the jug flashes out to us and is thus present to us as this utensil. And I mean, so maybe that's a sense of like if we see a rock that is shaped in just the right way, it would make for a perfect jug. That jug has flashed at us as a jug. And I think maybe I agree with that actually, right? That in a certain sense it becomes a jug. Right? It's a process of becoming in like a Nietzschean or even Deleuzean sense. But becoming jug, becoming useful, right? It is transformed from mere thing into artifact or into utensil because it flashes at us. There's this moment of encounter between us, well, me, who sees the rock in the forest and says that could be it, recognizes that could be a jug. Not that I look at it and I mathematically is even the wrong way to put it, just like quantitatively take up all of my perceptions and work my way up to the thesis that this might be a jug. Rather, I just have a gestalt view. It shows itself to me as a jug, and then it becomes a jug in that moment. So yeah, I think I need like time just to. I mean, the other thing with philosophical ideas is you have to just sit with them and see if you agree with them or not. Give them time to, ruminate. So I need to think about whether I could agree with that or not. That the jug could be essentially a jug, even if it occurs in nature, because it becomes a jug in this moment of encounter between me and it. I would need to spend some time thinking if I agree with that or not, but it sounds like I could agree with that. Okay, let's keep reading. Both the formative act and the choice of material, a choice given with the act. Well, okay, so in addition to making the jug, the formative act could also just be seeing the rock and taking it as a jug. That makes sense. Both the formative act and the choice of material. But it seems like at this point we're still just talking about artifacts, because it doesn't seem that there would be a formative act for mere things. But let's think. Both the formative act and the choice of material, a choice given with the act. Right? So the formative act also chooses, what paints you're going to use, what canvas you're going to use, etc. And I think it would be a mistake to think this means a conscious act. Right? Obviously, not all, in fact, maybe not even most art making is explicitly conscious. I mean, people have an idea of what they're going to do, but it's often a rough idea, and you do something by accident, you think it looks cool, you have a feeling of what you want to do. It's not necessarily explicitly, step by step outlined in advance. But I think that could be the formative act as well. The formative act is kind of deliberately says nothing more than the act which forms, right, the material. Both the formative act and the choice of material, a choice given with the act, and therewith the dominance of the conjunction of matter and form, are all grounded in such usefulness. A being that falls under usefulness is always the product of a process of making. Well, this is interesting because this links up, I think, with Heidegger's concerns about technology, that we only can understand things in their mode of being useful, and other modes of being are closed off from us, it seems like. So in that sense, the dominance of the matter-form relation would be a dominance of usefulness, a demand that everything must be made useful or must submit to the demands of usefulness. And maybe that's what it means to say therewith the dominance of the conjunction of matter and form, because matter and form are dominant because together they so clearly produce and explain and make visible usefulness. And that's why they have this power. I mean, that would make sense to me, at least. A being that falls under usefulness is always the product of a process of making. Oh, sorry. I should have muted my mic for that, sorry. A being that falls under usefulness is always the product of a process of making. Well, this kind of undoes what I was just saying earlier. If making means some human physical act of forming, unless making just could include just taking as useful. Because then it sounds like this couldn't apply to mere things at all. In fact, it could only apply to artifacts, because a being that falls under usefulness is always the product of a process of making. It is made as a piece of equipment for something. As determinations of beings, accordingly, matter and form have their proper place in the essential nature of equipment. This name designates what is produced expressly for employment and use. Matter and form are in no case original determinations of the thingness of the mere thing. So it sounds like Heidegger is saying here that in fact the matter-form distinction can't explain the mere thing, because it belongs essentially to artifacts, to human-made things, which are made by humans to be put towards some use. They essentially are equipment, right? So it belongs essentially to the sphere of equipment. But yeah, it seems like there's something being untheorized here, like I was saying, with the naturally occurring jug, or the naturally occurring weapon, like the sharp, jagged rock or something. Things that would be useful, but not made by humans. But I guess, I mean, a lot depends on the word making here. Because maybe like it could be interpreted the way I was saying, that it's like making could just include seeing the rock and taking it as something that might be useful. I don't know if it will help, but we could look at the German word. We haven't looked at this in a minute, so Um, and I'm also not so confident in my German. Well, I mean, I don't know German. I'm just learning it. Um, well, that's this concept right there. So, yeah, okay. This is the paragraph right here. Oh no, it's not. Is this it? I wish I was better at German. Grünzig. It's not a word? What? Well, maybe I don't know. I don't even know if this is actually going to help us, and I'm not even finding where we are. So, oh no, it's okay. So that is indeed the paragraph. So if we look, das Ergebnis wird verfertigt als ein Zug. Is this the word that's what is etwas? Let's find out what that is. Something. I don't know. I don't think this is going to help us. I think this is sending us down a rabbit hole here. Yeah, well, we'll try this. If it's not this, we'll just give up on this because I don't think this is helping us any. Yeah, you know what? Doesn't matter. It didn't help. Let's just go back. Let's just go back to reading the text. A being that falls under usefulness is always the product of a process of making. Yeah, we don't know what the word making is. If I could find it in the German, but I can't really read German, so maybe it could help, but I honestly don't think it would. I think it's going to probably be just as ambiguous in the German. Let's just read the next paragraph and see what happens. A piece of equipment, a pair of shoes, for instance, when finished, is also self-contained, like the mere thing. But it does not have the character of having taken the shape by itself, like the granite boulder. That seems to suggest to me that making means has not taken shape by itself. So I guess it's actually still worded vaguely enough that maybe that its shape could be my recognizing it as a jug. But it seems like more evidence is piling up against that articulation. And if so, I do think it seems like a problem for Heidegger's view. Okay. On the other hand, equipment displays an affinity with the artwork insofar as it is something produced by the human hand. Right, so although equipment has this essential difference from mere things, it shares with the artwork it's being produced by the human hand. And that seems, well, he didn't use the human hand here in this description. So again, he's managed to keep this ambiguity alive. However, by its self-sufficient presencing, the work of art is similar rather to the mere thing which has taken shape by itself and is self-contained. So, weirdly, the artwork is like equipment in that it is man-made or man-shaped. But it is like the mere thing in the sense that, as an essential component of the hammer is its usefulness, the way it is bound up in human projects. This is an essential component of the hammer. It is not an essential component of the clod of dirt. In fact, the clod of dirt, something essential about it is that it is self-sufficient and exists on its own terms. Now, I'm wondering, of course, isn't it bound up in certain, like, agricultural schemas? Well, agricultural is not even the right word, like, because that's still human, but like, isn't it bound up in its ecosystem? But I don't know. I'd have to think more about that. I mean, I don't know that that's necessarily a problem for Heidegger because he's specifically emphasizing, being bound up in human ends in the case of the hammer or any utensil or equipment. But is the clod of dirt really a self-sufficient presencing? It's certainly self-sufficient or independent from humans, but I don't know if it's necessarily completely self-sufficient and not, But then again, the work of art is self-sufficient, and that's not independent from humans. So obviously self-sufficient doesn't mean independent from humans. But yeah, the similarity is that, contra the hammer, which is, I guess that's the point. That the hammer is like immediate. The hammer exists only, and in fact, its meaning and its being only is the way it mediates between the human and the nail going into the wall. It connects actors. The clod of dirt might be bound up in and is bound up in relations in an ecosystem, but it itself is more like the human than the hammer in the sense that, of course, it has relations to things. Well, now I'm starting to sound like object-oriented ontology or something, but, I'm not going down that route. I'm just saying that the dirt is self-sufficient. It's a thing which is meaning is not only the function that it performs. It has a meaning in its own just being and existing, I think. But this seems like really thorny stuff that needs to be worked out. And I wouldn't be opposed to doing it live here necessarily, but I do want to get through the essay in a somewhat timely manner. Well, I also have to, but that's for a different reason. I have to write a chapter about it that's due soon. That's why. Which is what the artwork is like, right? The artwork is, man-made, but the artwork is does not perform a function. That's what Heidegger's saying, right? And some people think that the artwork does perform a function, right? That but they're generally speaking. Well, some people now think that the artwork is just entertainment. So essentially, you get the kind of absurd argument. Well, I think it's absurd that there's no difference theoretically if we could advance the science enough between any great artwork and a pill that triggers the pleasure neurons in your brain, which is nothing. It's not an anti-science stance I'm taking or anything like that. It's just like, it's absurd to think that what art fundamentally is it's pleasure producing. I mean, whatever. But that would be one way of turning the art into usefulness. Or of course the other one, which I was first thinking of, which is another, I think, absurdity, is to think of art as primarily, what shows the good politics or something. Artwork is good when it flatters my personal views or something, right? Both of those make art useful. So I don't know that it's necessarily obvious what Heidegger's saying, that the art is not useful. But at the same time, those do seem like sort of limit cases, and also, in a certain way, very contemporary cases. The artwork having a self-sufficiency and not being useful for anything seems like a fairly, a not totally wacky, and in fact, I would assume most intuitive view about what the artwork is, right? And so that's what the mere things have in common with the artwork, is that they're self-sufficient and self-contained. Their meaning is not, they are not just a use. All right. And so what I'm saying also with why the artwork is not just pleasure producing material is that otherwise you'd have to say that the pleasure pill and the Shakespeare or whatever, to use just like an obvious example or cliche example, are both equipment, and they're both the same thing. They're essentially interchangeable, but they're obviously not. Or if you're going to argue that, that's going to be a very counterintuitive argument. And the difference must be because it isn't just, even if it could do that, the thing is self-contained. It isn't just its usefulness. Where the hammer is, Heidegger's saying, and I don't really think he's wrong to say this, it literally is just its usefulness. That's all the hammer is. That's what equipment is its usefulness. And by just its usefulness, I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean that is essentially what it is its usefulness. The artwork, like the clod of dirt, is not essentially its usefulness. And in fact, it has a self-containedness. It is, unlike the hammer, which is a merely immediate thing, it has a self-contained objecthood. I mean, we could call it objecthood. I don't think Heidegger's going to call it that, but... So yeah. So that makes sense to me. Some water. Nevertheless, we do not count such works among mere things. Right. So although they have this in common. Hey Pesto, how's it going? Just getting here. Hi, are we still talking? No, we're past Kant now. We're talking about the relation between Heidegger saying that artworks have more in common with clods of dirt than with other, a hammer or a jug or some other human-made object. So we're about to find out why. And thanks for saying hi and stopping by in the chat. So where were we? However, by its self-sufficient presencing, the work of art is similar rather to the mere thing which has taken shape by itself and is self-contained. Nevertheless, we do not count such works among mere things. As a rule, it is the use objects around us that are the nearest and the proper things. Thus, the piece of equipment is half thing because characterized by thingliness, and yet it is something more. At the same time, it is half artwork and yet something less because lacking the self-sufficiency of the artwork. Equipment has a peculiar position intermediate between thing and work, assuming that such a calculated ordering of them is permissible. So we have kind of here like an Aristotle-like spectrum. On the one hand is equipment as the thing that is nearest to us. Equipment is in the middle. Sorry, I'm wrong about that. We have the thing. I mean, maybe this ends up just being like an Aristotle form matter spectrum. But we have the thing, which is well, he doesn't explain exactly why the thing is over here, but it's that it's the mere thing. It's that it's not formed by making, right? It's not, essentially it's just what's untouched by humans is essentially what he means, right? The thing, by the mere thing, what he means is, rocks, clods of dirt, those are the examples he's using. Anything that's just, not alive and in nature and not affected by humans. Right, and then the other end, but it's also self-sufficient. The other end is the self-sufficient thing created by humans, and that's the work, the art, which means the artwork, right? The sculpture, which, like the dirt is self-contained in itself, it's a thing. The sculpture is self-contained in itself, in a thing, it's a thing, but it's created by humans, and presumably why that's something more. Other than maybe just a kind of human centrism, is that it has some meaning or something, right? That it conveys something. Equipment is between the two because it doesn't have, it's more than the thing in the sense that a hammer or a jug or a shoe is formed by humans. That's a sense in which it is more than a thing, but it is still less than the work because it's not self-contained. Because, like we were just talking about, it is only its usefulness. It's only its relation. There's no meaning to the hammer other than what it does. And this is what makes the artwork different from equipment and makes it actually more like a clod of dirt, that it has a meaning unto itself and it cannot only just be explained as what it does or what use it has. And so I think here it's safe to assume that what's going to happen is Heidegger's going to accuse the matter form structure of failing to understand artworks by trying to submit them to usefulness, since he's already suggested that matter form structure is the essential defining mode of being of equipment, and yet he's just set up that artworks are not equipment. The matter-form structure, however, by which the being of a piece of equipment is first determined, readily presents itself as the immediately intelligible constitution of every being, because here man himself, as maker, participates in the way in which the piece of equipment comes into being. Because equipment takes an intermediate place between mere thing and work, the suggestion is that non-equipmental beings, things and works, and ultimately all beings, are to be comprehended with the help of the being of equipment, the matter-form structure. So I guess that's the point of setting up this spectrum, right? That on one end's the thing and one end's the work, and everything between is equipment. That's supposed to be the argument or explanation for why we would understand things and beings, or things and works, also in terms of the matter-form structure, even though the matter-form structure does not apply to things or works, but only to equipment. But it's interesting because it has that parallel between the kind of Aristotle sense of there being a spectrum, and on one end is God, who's absolute perfection, and on the other end is the nothingness or void, which is absolute possibility, and then humans and the material world are like in between those two on the spectrum. And that seems to be something that Heidegger takes as a useful reason for analyzing that. Wonder where in the hammer art spectrum a crucifix would stand. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, this is one of the things I've been wondering as I'm reading this, is that I feel like it's Heidegger is suggesting some things that are not, he's not making sufficiently clear. Like, yeah, a crucifix has a very real political use. And potentially, if you believe in it religiously, also you believe, I guess, it has a very like spiritual, practical use. But it is like literally formed as art. That's a really interesting question. And I don't know. If you know, feel free, or if you have an idea, feel free to say. I was wondering also about like, what if you find, you know, a rock in the. This is getting dark. I'm gonna turn the light on. What if you find a rock in nature that's you could use as a weapon or as a jug? Wouldn't that also be a like equipment that you didn't form? So it seems like there's some things that he hasn't totally cleared up here. But yeah, that's really interesting about the crucifix. Yeah, it's very interesting. I wonder, it's possible that someone has written about that, since there are writings about, you know, Heidegger's crypto Christianity. But yeah, very interesting. Yeah, so because equipment takes an intermediate place from mere thing and work, the suggestion is that non-equipmental beings are to be comprehended with the help of the being of equipment, right? So that, you know, you have to understand that we have made this big mistake historically of trying to understand artworks and also mere things as equipment, right? When we talk about art in terms of matter and form, which is like the most common way of talking about it, Heidegger's saying we're making this huge mistake because we're confusing it for equipment. The inclination to treat the matter-form structure as the constitution of every being receives an additional impulse from the fact that on the basis of a religious faith, namely the biblical faith, oh, maybe we'll get an answer right here to the crucifix. that on the basis of a religious faith, namely the biblical faith, the totality of all beings is represented in advance as something created, which here means made, right? So God as the maker, and that would be the sense in which everything gets turned into equipment. So this is also, I guess, something that's going to be blamed, that Heidegger's going to blame on a certain Christian worldview, where God makes everything. And so it's kind of Christianity's fault that we take everything as equipment. The philosophy of this faith can, of course, assure us that all of God's creative work is to be thought of as different from the action of a craftsman. Nevertheless, if at the same time or even beforehand, in accordance with the presumed predetermination of Thomistic philosophy for interpreting the Bible, the ens creatum is conceived as a unity of materia and forma, then faith is expounded by way of a philosophy whose truth lies in an unconcealedness of beings which differs in kind from the world believed in by faith. So I guess the argument, what he's saying here is that this philosophy, which would be, I guess, Aquinas, basically, Thomistic, makes the distinction, I haven't read Aquinas, between the kind of creation that a craftsman does and the creation that God does. I think this would be well, I think possibly what that distinction would be that that there's not the element of striving when God creates something. God just opens his eyes and creates out of nothing, versus the more, human creation relies on social and historical and the matter available to you, versus the kind of complete creation from void that God has. I would be my guess of maybe what that means, or what the argument is. Nevertheless, if at the same time or even beforehand, but it seems like Heidegger's saying, so the ens creatum, if it's conceived as matter and form, then it seems like it's saying, well, then it actually is the same if it's matter and form. I guess is what he's saying, right? And that's why it differs in kind from the world believed in by faith, because faith believes in a world maybe that's what he means. The philosophy of this faith can, of course, assure us that all of God's creative work is to be thought of as different from the action of a craftsman. Nevertheless, if at the same time or even beforehand, in accordance with the presumed predetermination of Thomistic philosophy for interpreting the Bible, well, so if the philosophy's truth lies in an unconcealedness of beings, remember that the unconcealedness of beings is the way that the beings unconceal themselves, which is to say the way that they appear or come into being, is through matter and form. So the way they appear is as formed matter, and formed matter is something essentially made. It seems like what he's saying is that then this philosophy basically does think the world is created by God the same way a craftsman creates a shoe or a pot or a jug or an axe or a hammer. And that's the sense in which it would differ, because faith believes that there is some different special way of God's creating the world. But if it's matter and form, then there's matter that is formed. It's not, I guess, yeah, I think that is what he means. Like, it's not what I was talking about, that God just opens his eyes and the world spills forth. It's rather that there's matter that God's working on and forming like a craftsman. So I think that's what he means there, right? That despite faith's belief, desire to believe that there's some special kind of God's creation, at least in the Thomistic philosophy, which has been so influential in Western culture, God is a craftsman, and it's for that reason. It's for that reason that we erroneously understand everything in the form matter structure. And then that's a perfect example of what he was talking about earlier, how this idea, the highly morphe matter form idea, emerges in ancient Greek philosophy, but then gets picked up in Latin, like medieval Latin, and its origin gets lost, so to speak, and it becomes just understood as the general way things are in the world, and then you lose that it was actually something that emerged to explain a specific type of thing, to explain equipment, and now just gets applied indiscriminately to everything, loses all meaning, and we can't understand beings anymore because all we can see them as is form and matter, which is makes sense only if you're applying it to equipment. To any other type of being, it makes no sense to use that schema, I think is what Heidegger's saying here. Okay, so we're going to get some more about faith. The idea of creation, grounded in faith, can lose its guiding power for knowledge of beings as a whole. But the theological interpretation of all beings, the view of the world in terms of matter and form borrowed from an alien philosophy, having once been instituted, can still remain a force. So I preempted where we were already going, because that's what he says right here. This happens in the transition from the Middle Ages to modern times. The metaphysics of the modern period rests on the form-matter structure devised in the medieval period, which itself merely recalls, in its words, the buried natures of eidos and hyli. So eidos is idea, so it's the outward appearance of how something appears to you, and hyli is form. Thus, the interpretation of thing by means of matter and form, whether it remains medieval or becomes Kantian transcendental, has become current and self-evident. But for that reason, no less than the other interpretations mentioned of the thingness of the thing, it is an encroachment upon the thing being of the thing. And I guess for the shift when it becomes Kantian transcendental is rather than God giving the form to the matter in Kantian transcendental, that's the quote-unquote Copernican revolution of Kant. It's, me, the subject, that gives form. I look at something and I apply the categories of space and time and quantity and quality and modality and all that, and I apply the form to the matter. But either way, both, despite their differences, are form-matter structures. And it's an encroachment upon the thing being of the thing, for what I was just saying, I guess, that attempts to turn everything into equipment when it isn't, Heidegger's suggesting. And that's what it means to say the idea of creation can lose its force. In other words, right? We can become a more secular society post-Enlightenment, but, Kant, paradigmatic Enlightenment philosopher, actually still has this inherited from Christian philosophy, this idea of form and matter to explain beings. The situation stands revealed as soon as we speak of things in the proper sense as mere things. The mere, after all, means the removal of the character of usefulness and of being made. Right. So now we knew what mere thing meant, but now we have a more strict definition. It's the removal of usefulness and of being made, right? But then it's like, well, to go back to the example I was using, if I pick up a rock and use it as a weapon, isn't that a thing that's not made but that is useful? But I guess it was transformed into equipment when I took it as a weapon. But when the rock sits unused and unmade, then it is a mere thing. So I guess literally just even without changing it, the act of taking a rock and using it as a weapon, or even understanding that it could be used as a weapon, would be a mode or an event of elevating the mere thing to equipment. I think that would be an accurate interpretation. The mere thing is a sort of equipment, albeit equipment denuded of its equipmental being. So that's, I guess, where you come back to the spectrum, right? If you take the equipmental being off, I guess this could also apply if the watch breaks, maybe. If the watch is broken and you can no longer use it, it's denuded of its equipmental being. And then it becomes the mere thing, which is just a self-contained thing which does not have a use. Thing being consists in what is then left over, but this remnant is not actually defined in its ontological character. It remains doubtful whether the thingly character comes to view at all in the process of stripping off everything equipmental. Thus, the third mode of interpretation of the thing, that which follows the lead of the matter-form structure, also turns out to be an assault upon the thing. So at the end of all this, even the third definition, it turns out, will not be good enough to explain the thing. Because as we began this question, it turns out the third definition, which is matter, form, structure, is a perfect definition of equipment, but it won't do for things. Because once you strip the equipment of its equipmentality and return it to being a thing, the thingly character is not explained, does not come into view under the matter, form, structure. And it's an assault upon the thing because it demands of the thing that it be useful, which is also, I guess, where you can see a parallel with where Heidegger will go with art, since it's an assault upon art to attempt to make it useful. Art is not a thing which is useful for Heidegger. In fact, it's essential to art that it is not useful. I wish he said a little bit more clearly why this remnant is not actually defined in its ontological character. I mean, from what you've already said so far, I think we have a decent idea, which is that it relies on making, in a certain sense, a being formed, and that form is, I guess the form is teleological in the sense that it drives towards some use. Not that that is always what teleological means, but in this case, maybe. And that would be, I guess, maybe why Aristotle would be wrong for Heidegger. The kind of teleology of all things, making them submit to use. Where, say, the use of the human is to be virtuous or something. Okay, we can keep moving. I could. There's always sections I could puzzle over for longer. But I think we should just keep moving. These three modes of defining thingness conceive of the thing as a bearer of traits, as the unity of a manifold of sensations, as formed matter. So those are the three examples. The bearer of traits, primary, secondary qualities model, the unity of a manifold of sensations, the most extreme version of like empiricism, where things are just nothing more than a sum total of sensations, and the formed matter that we were just talking about. The way in which matter takes a form in having its qualities, but it's different from the first one in the sense that the matter is directly accessible. It's not like a primary qualities, which are internal to the thing but not actually accessible. It's like the matter is directly accessible. In fact, it's what you're touching when you touch the thing is the actual matter. It's my phone. It's just that it's formed. But anyway, all those things, it turns out, are wrong, according to Heidegger. In the course of the history of truth about beings, the interpretations mentioned have also entered into combinations, a matter we may now pass over. Right? So in addition to having one of those three, you could mix and match them in different ways. In such combinations, they have further strengthened their innate tendency to expand so as to apply in the same way to thing, to equipment, and to work. Right? So it's already bad enough that the definitions are so broad that they can apply to the three different things, thing, equipment, and work. And those tendencies only get even worse when we start talking about when we start putting them together, which is obviously being done to give them the power to have a wider domain. But like we're talking about, the wider the domain is, the more things it can explain, the emptier and more meaningless the concept is. Because when it's less things to explain, it's more specific. When it gets bigger, it just has of necessity has to get thinner and thinner and less meaningful of a concept so that it can explain more and more things without contradicting itself. Thus, they give rise to a mode of thought by which we think not only about thing, equipment, and work, but about all beings in general, right? So eventually, it gets so bad that they apply to literally the widest set you can have, at least of existent things, which is just all beings in general. This long familiar mode of thought preconceives all immediate experience of beings. The preconception shackles reflection on the being of any given being, right? So that's the sense in which, when Heidegger's saying in being in time, we forgot the question of being or forgotten how to ask it. It's because we think in advance that we already know what being is, which is that being is a thing. And that being is a thing explained on any combination of these three ideas inherited from ancient philosophy. to even be able to raise the question of being, we have to, in a certain sense, historicize these ideas by recognizing that they are not just, truths hanging out there in the world, but specific ideas that have emerged from ancient philosophy, but that have gotten so baked into our general culture or general cultural ideas that it's hard to even recognize them anymore as specific ideas someone had at one point in history that are now just kind of floating in our general consciousness. Thus, it comes about that prevailing thing concepts obstruct the way toward the thingly character of the thing, as well as toward the equipmental character of the equipment, and all the more toward the workly character of the work. Right? Because those things are all asking about the being of any given being. Right? Thingly character, the equipmental character, the workly character. So, ironically, taking everything as things not only makes it impossible to know what equipment is and what works are, but even what things are, because even that definition is being applied too widely to be applied properly to things. That is why it is necessary to know about these thing concepts, in order thereby to take heed of their provenance and their boundless presumption, but also of their semblance of self-evidence. Right? That what I was just talking about, right? That they seem self-evident or obvious, rather than things that only seem that way because we've inherited them from history. This knowledge becomes all the more necessary when we risk the attempt to bring to view and express in words the thingly character of the thing, the equipmental character of the equipment, and the workly character of the work. This knowledge being the historical provenance. To this end, however, only one element is needful: to keep at a distance all the preconceptions and assaults of the above mode of thought, to leave the thing to rest in its own self, for instance, in its thing being. So, the phenomenological, right? To let the thing be what it is without, in any way assaulting it in thought. And what it would mean to assault it would be to take our preconceptions and force them upon the thing, rather than for us to be good phenomenologists, treating our only job as a kind of self-effacement, where we destroy all our preconceived notions and just let the thing give itself as itself. And that's one of the reasons that, for Heidegger to do phenomenology requires the historical destruction. Destruction the same, but German's way. So instead of with a C, it's spelled with a K. Because to get to a point where we could let the things give themselves as themselves, which is to say, to destroy all our preconceptions we might bring to the table, preconceptions, biases, whatever, requires actually going back through the history of philosophy and destroying all these ideas that we've inherited or that have been forced upon us. What seems easier, but one of the questions I still have, and we'll see if he answers this, is well, we'll see, right? I mean, it's that Platonic question, how do you know when you've found what you're looking for if you don't already know in advance what you're looking for, kind of thing. But is there not some preconception already just imposed by the word thing or something? That's a question I have, I guess, for Heidegger, but we'll see if he answers it. What seems easier than to let a thing be just the being that it is? Or does this turn out to be the most difficult of tasks, particularly if such an intention, to let a being be as it is, represents the opposite of the indifference that simply turns its back upon the being itself in favor of an unexamined concept of being? We ought to turn toward the being, think about it in regard to its being, but by means of this thinking at the same time, let it rest upon itself in its very own essence. All right, so yeah, I mean, it's like what I was just saying, but to figure out how to orient yourself toward the being, which requires, this attack on your preconceptions and your unexamined sense of what being is, to do that, and at the same time to let the thing rest upon its own essence and show itself to you. I just had an image of like Nintendo 64, like Pokemon Snap, but it's Heidegger Snap. You're just going around trying to let the beings be in their own way, and you don't want to disturb them, so you can catch the photo of them. This exertion of thought seems to meet with its greatest resistance in defining the thingness of the thing. For where else could the cause lie of the failure of the efforts mentioned? The unpretentious thing evades thought most stubbornly. The greatest resistance is in defining the thingness of the thing, because the term thing has been so heavily over theorized, I think is what Heidegger is saying, right? Like, because everything has been taken as things, there's this effect that thingness in particular is hard to think about, because that would require destroying the thing concept that we've inherited, which is going to be particularly difficult. The unpretentious thing evades thought most stubbornly. I don't know what unpretentious means there. Let's quickly check something, because I mean the like, is it the thing that is pretentious, or is it my observation of it that's pretentious? Oh, we don't have a good etymology for this. Yeah, I guess it's just unpretentious in the sense that I think it's just a similar word to mere, just the unpretentious thing. And it also is just kind of a poetic image, I guess, of the thing that is unpretentious, that is not coming forth or boasting or showing itself, but, something that actually evades thought. Now there's more fuel for my Pokemon metaphor I'm imagining. Yeah, mere is definitely a suspect word. I guess this is one of the things that I've kind of been wondering this whole time I've been reading this, right? He's defining mere. He gives a bunch of examples, like a mere thing is the clod of dirt, it's the block of granite. Essentially, it seems that what mere means for him is natural things which are not alive, which are not man-made, but it seems like there's a lot of edge cases you could find for that. So Yeah, I also find the word mere here pretty suspect. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, that too. Like, at what point do those things fall into equipment or something like that? The unpretentious thing evades thought most stubbornly. Or can it be that this self refusal of the mere thing, this self contained, irreducible spontaneity, belongs precisely to the essence of the thing? Wait, what? The unpretentious thing evades thought most stubbornly. Or can it be that this self that seems really strange. Or can it be then this self refusal of the mere thing? Well, okay, let's just work this out. The mere thing is doing a self refusal. This self contained, irreducible spontaneity. When I see the word spontaneity, at least in this context, from a German philosopher, I'm thinking of Kant, but I don't know that this is a Kantian reference here. Belongs precisely to the essence of the thing. Must not this strange and uncommunicative feature of the essence of the thing become intimately familiar to thought that tries to think the thing? If so, then we should not force our way to its thingly character. I get, yeah, I mean, this is a bit strange to me, but this self refusal of the mere thing, um is, I mean, well, it sounds like the refusal that we're talking about is just the fact that the thing concept has been applied so widely that it's hard to get to the mere thing. Um but it evades thought, and maybe, I guess this is what he's saying, but I don't know, that just seems weird to me, but that the mere thing, something actually essential in its definition, is its resistance to being thought, its resistance to being defined. Must not this strange and uncommunicative feature of the essence of the thing become intimately familiar to thought that tries to think the thing? I guess that's what he's saying, but it just seems very odd that something essential to the thing is its resistance to being defined. I guess that's what he's saying. But yeah, I don't know why that would be the case. But maybe I'll try reading the next paragraph and see if that makes that make more sense. Like, I think I understand what he's saying, which is just that, but why he's saying that, I don't know. That the thingness of the thing is particularly difficult to express and only seldom expressible is infallibly documented by the history of its interpretation indicated above. Yeah. This history coincides with the destiny in accordance with which Western thought has hitherto thought the being of beings. And I think the destiny, meaning Heidegger's sense, like in the essay Concerning Technology, that the long arc of Western thought is from all the way from this initial conception of things as equipment all the way back in Aristotle to the kind of death spiral of the present into hyper technologization of everything and climate change and the way in which the whole world is turned into equipment, and all the being of beings is thought as equipment, which is how you get the kind of things he's talking about in the Question Concerning Technology essay, where the entire world is turned into standing reserve and turned into things that can be used. I think that's what he means when he says the destiny, which the arc with the way that Western thought has hitherto thought the being of beings. This is the arc or the destiny of where Western thought is headed, is towards this hyper technologization, denial of death. The kind of Peter Thiel is my usually go-to example if I'm talking about what Heidegger means by the technologization and denial of death. Is him imagining being uploaded, his consciousness uploaded to a cloud or whatever, so he never dies. I think that's what he means, what Heidegger means here. That history coincides with the destiny in accordance with which Western thought has hitherto thought the being of beings. However, not only do we now establish this point, at the same time we discover a clue in this history. Is it an accident that in the interpretation of the thing, the view that takes matter and form as guide attains special dominance? This definition of the thing derived from an interpretation of the equipmental being of equipment. An equipment, having come into being through human making, is a being particularly familiar to human thinking. At the same time, this being that is so familiar in its being has a peculiar intermediate position between thing and work. We shall follow this clue and search first for the equipmental character of equipment. Perhaps this will suggest something to us about the thingly character of the thing and the workly character of the work. We must only avoid making thing and work prematurely into subspecies of equipment. We are disregarding the possibility, however, that differences relating to the essential history of being may yet also be present in the way equipment is. So, that paragraph clarifies this, which I now realize is saying something fairly straightforward in a very poetic and metaphorically obtuse way, which is just we're likely, if the thing is not equipment, what makes it difficult for us to think and makes us likely to take it in terms of equipment is that equipment being, made by humans is something that we as humans are more predisposed to understand or to think in terms of. So to think the thing, you would have to think it outside of a especially human context, I guess. So, but since, and this is Heidegger's always doing this, he's always emphasizing what's nearest to us or what's closest to us and saying you should start your phenomenological investigation concretely from what is closest to you. So it makes sense for him to say, well, equipment is what is closest to us, so let's turn now to equipment. Rather than asking what is the thing, ask what is equipment, and see if, given that equipment is between thing and work, answering the question what is equipment will tell us, or can at least open up the path to telling us what the thing is. So the move makes sense, except that I feel like we already defined equipment, I thought, as matter and form. But we'll see. But what path leads to the equipmental quality of equipment? How shall we discover what a piece of equipment truly is? The procedure necessary at present must plainly avoid any attempts that again immediately entail the encroachments of the usual interpretations. We are most easily insured against this if we simply describe some equipment without any philosophical theory. Right, so this is just classic, what Heidegger always loves to do, to go back concretely, and have a phenomenological description where you're just describing concretely your experience of the thing and trying as much as possible to avoid bringing any philosophical concepts to bear when describing the thing, right? We choose as example a common sort of equipment, a pair of peasant shoes. And of course, this is going to be important later because he's going to analyze, it's right here actually, where he analyzes the painting of shoes by Van Gogh. We choose as example a common sort of equipment, a pair of peasant shoes. We do not even need to exhibit actual pieces of this sort of useful article in order to describe them. Peasant shoes, fuck yeah. That'd be a good punk band name. Peasant shoes, fuck yeah. We do not need to exhibit actual pieces of this sort of useful article in order to describe them. Everyone is acquainted with them. But since it is a matter here of direct description, it may be well to facilitate the visual realization of them. For this purpose, a pictorial representation suffices. It's interesting because that doesn't seem obvious to me that if you wanted to describe shoes, you could just look at a painting of shoes rather than shoes themselves. But nonetheless, that's what Heidegger's saying. We shall choose a well-known painting by Van Gogh, who painted such shoes several times. But what is there to see here? Everyone knows what shoes consist of. I'm not familiar with that word. B-A-S-T? It's not really that relevant, but I'll look it up anyway. Can't type. Okay. So essentially they're like wooden shoes. Okay. Oh, I didn't check pronunciation.
Bast.
Bast, okay. They are a kind of basket woven and fitted to the shape of the foot. Bast shoes are an obsolete traditional footwear of the forest areas of northern Europe. These aren't the kind you pump up. Yeah, okay. Interesting. And that makes sense also that they're an obsolete traditional footwear of the forest areas, since Heidegger's always liking to use examples from his life, his peasant life in southern Germany, as examples. So that makes sense that that's funny that he says bast shoes then. Interesting. If they are not wooden or bast shoes, there will be leather soles and uppers joined together by thread and nails. Such gear serves to clothe the feet. Depending on the use to which the shoes are to be put, whether for work in the field or for dancing, matter and form will differ. So even in the case of dancing, which I guess could maybe be called an art, although I guess it couldn't be called a work, the shoes are still, practical use. And so really this is just like, a very straightforward description of the most, as much as possible, a bare description of shoes without any philosophical baggage. And I think that's fair to say. There's not too much in there. Such statements, no doubt correct, only explicate what we already know. The equipmental quality of equipment consists in its usefulness. But what about this usefulness itself? In conceiving it, do we already conceive along with it the equipmental character of equipment? In order to succeed in doing this, must we not look out for useful equipment in its use? The peasant woman wears her shoes in the field. Only here are they what they are. Yeah, so that goes back to what I was saying earlier, that it sounds like for Heidegger, equipment, what it means to say that it's not self-contained is that equipment is actually only equipment, or it only becomes equipment when it's being used. Right? So the peasant woman's shoes are only here are they what they are when she wears them in the field. They are all the more genuinely so, the less the peasant woman thinks about the shoes while she is at work, or looks at them at all, or is even aware of them. She stands and walks in them. Right, so this is that kind of same thing as being in time. The hammer disappears, contra the philosopher who wants to look at the hammer and analyze it from a bunch of different angles and ask about essential qualities or features of the hammer. The hammer is really only the hammer, according to Heidegger, when it's being used, right? And when it's being used, rather than it being hyper-present, like when you're analyzing every inch of it, it actually just disappears into use. You barely even notice the hammer until you accidentally hit your thumb or something. And same here, the shoes, you barely even notice the shoes. You just use the shoes. You stand in the shoes and walk in them. The question I have is, in terms of something like, that I think an interesting potential limit case would be something like video games. Like, in terms of, is a video game a work or equipment, right? Because you do use it. In a certain sense, I guess you're presently aware of a video game, maybe. But then at the same time, when you're like, unless you're like, I kind of do it, I guess, when I'm playing like Souls or something, I'm looking at all the environments. But, if you're playing Counter-Strike or whatever, you're not analyzing the textures on the wall usually. You're just kind of using it and playing the game. But I guess maybe it would be neither equipment nor work. It would be game, maybe. But that could be an interesting limit case. But anyway, the shoes disappear in their use. And they essentially are what they are when they disappear in their use. That is how shoes actually serve. It is in this process of the use of equipment that we must actually encounter the character of equipment. And it could be useful to look up the word serve, since anytime you see a word like that in Heidegger, he picked it carefully. I guess we looked it up earlier. I guess it's just literally, like the equipment is that it serves. That is its function. What makes it useful is that it serves. And I guess probably the reason he's using the word serve is that he would distinguish it from technology, maybe? Since technology doesn't necessarily serve us, but inframes us. I don't know. But yeah, anyway, the shoes actually serve. It is in this process of the use of equipment that we must actually encounter the character of equipment. As long as we only imagine a pair of shoes in general, or simply look at the empty, unused shoes as they merely stand there in the picture, we shall never discover what the equipmental being of the equipment in truth is. So I mean, yeah, that's a good way of putting it. That makes it sound less weird. It's like if you, in some kind of thought experiment, if you sent some aliens from a different galaxy the painting of the shoes, or even the shoes themselves, they couldn't potentially actually know what the shoes are by just seeing them. It's only when they would see them being used that they could understand the meaning of the shoes, understand what the shoes are. And that's one thing it means, I guess, for Heidegger to have this idea that things aren't just, abstract objects. They are things that have meanings that are integrated in the world, is what it means to say that, that they are shoes. And what shoes are is not just an object that has these particular properties, right? But they are, shoes are what serve this function, to stand and walk in them. They are their usefulness. From Van Gogh's painting, we cannot even tell where these shoes stand. Right? So also the painting, even for us, can't necessarily tell us about the shoes. We know what shoes are, and we can infer that, but they can't tell us the specifics of these particular shoes. There is nothing surrounding this pair of peasant shoes in or to which they might belong, only an undefined space. There are not even clods of soil from the field or the field path sticking to them, which would at least hint at their use. A pair of peasant shoes and nothing more. And yet, let me actually put the painting up. Might as well have it on screen while we're doing this. There we go. That's the painting that Heidegger's talking about by Van Gogh. Yeah, I like this and yet period, this sentence fragment for poetic effect. Right, the painting, in a certain way, what he's saying is that the painting is very bad at being useful. Because ostensibly, if it could be useful, it would be to tell us something about these shoes. Or to be, in a weird reading of a Platonic sense, to stand in for the shoes, right? But we don't know who these shoes, what the function of these shoes are. We don't know to whom they belong, right? There are not even clods of soil from the field or the field path sticking to them, which would at least hint at their use. We don't even know what they're really used for. We have no information about these shoes. They're a pair of peasant shoes and nothing more. So the painting is not particularly useful. And yet, from the dark opening of the worn insides of the shoes, the toilsome tread of the worker stares forth. In the stiffly rugged heaviness of the shoes, there is the accumulated tenacity of her slow trudge through the far-spreading and ever-uniform furrows of the field, swept by a raw wind. On the leather lie the dampness and richness of the soil. Under the soles stretches the loneliness of the field path as evening falls. In the shoes vibrate the silent call of the earth, its quiet gift of the ripening grain and its unexplained self-refusal in the fallow desolation of the wintry field. This equipment is pervaded by uncomplaining worry as to the certainty of bread, the wordless joy of having once more withstood want, the trembling before the impending childbed, and shivering at the surrounding menace of death. Right, so it was this kind of poetic description of all of the way that just looking at this painting of the shoes, seeing that they're worn, which tells us some things, but also just knowing things about them, that they have a certain, they're part of a world, right? That they're bound up in a larger world, and a larger, where world is the way in which life is meaningful to someone. The peasant who has these shoes, her world is shown through the painting. We see the way in which her life is lived and the way in which it's meaningful. And especially, I think this is something we'll see later, since Heidegger talks later about the Greek temple, which also sets up a world, but is sort of distant from us because it's too far removed by thousands of years for us to really know exactly what world it reveals. For Heidegger, the peasant shoes is a very, for him, concrete example, because he also grew up in late 19th century, early 20th century rural Germany. And potentially in that sense, it's also, this world reveals itself more comfortably for him than it does, for me or for any of us looking at this essay, even just, 100 years, well, less than 100 years, like 80 years later. Yeah, right. Tao and the Agrarian Revolution. So this equipment belongs to the earth, and it is protected in the world of the peasant woman. From out of this protected belonging, the equipment itself rises to its resting within itself. So that's right, the word that I was just introducing there, where the earth, and Heidegger's always using these kind of poetic metaphors, a lot of which he's getting from Hölderlin, the earth and the world. But the world is your lived world, the way in which the world is meaningfully lived by you. The earth is what sustains that world, or what makes it possible. And so he kind of says that without strictly defining earth. So it's a point of debate in the scholarship what earth means exactly. You could take it as literally like earth, like the ground or the soil. I tend to take it more as like the possibilities, or like the possibility space that allows a world to come forth. So I guess a little more abstract, but that's what I tend to take earth as. But either way, the equipment belongs to the earth, and it is protected in the world of the peasant woman. From out of this protected belonging, the equipment itself rises to its resting within itself. And the protection or the sheltering is also an important idea for Heidegger, that being has to be protected or sheltered to reveal itself, right? So contra the assault or the violence of these other ways of understanding the thing or the equipment or whatever, that try to submit it to a definition that would stretch widely over the whole domain of things and thereby lose the individual particularity. An understanding or thinking of the thing that would safeguard or protect the thing and thus allow it to be itself would be one like the one just described, where you put aside all your philosophical presuppositions and let the thing be itself or show itself as it is. And that's a form of protecting or safeguarding the thing. I mean, there's a lot to be worked out here, potentially, in what it means to say protected and resting within itself. But I want to not do that right now and come back to it later, in the sense that there will be more that he will say that can help us work that out a little better. It's also, I'm probably going to stop soonish because I'm been going for a while. Although I would like to finish this section, but we still have like 5 more pages. We'll see how far I can go. Let me take some water first. But perhaps it is only in the picture that we notice all this about the shoes. It is only in the picture that we notice all this about the shoes. The peasant woman, on the other hand, simply wears them. Which is what I was talking about earlier, right? That you can stop and look at the shoes and attempt to understand the shoes, versus like the philosopher does, or I guess also maybe the artist does, versus the person actually using the equipment, where the equipment essentially disappears in its use, right? You don't like when I was first taking a Heidegger class, we were talking about this point. The professor was like, "How many of you noticed the chair you're sitting in just now?" And people are kind of like, "Oh shit," in the sense that the chair disappears in its use. You don't think about you're not thinking about the chair as you're using it. In fact, one of the things that happens when you use it is that you forget about it, or something like that. If only this simple wearing were so simple. When she takes off her shoes late in the evening in deep but healthy fatigue and reaches out for them again in the still dim dawn, or passes them by on the day of rest, she knows all this without noticing or reflecting. The equipmental being of the equipment consists indeed in its usefulness. But this usefulness itself rests in the abundance of an essential being of the equipment. We call it reliability. By virtue of this reliability, the peasant woman is made privy to the silent call of the earth. By virtue of the reliability of the equipment, she is sure of her world. World and earth exist for her, and for those who are with her in her mode of being, only thus, in the equipment. We say only, and therewith fall into error, for the reliability of the equipment first gives to the simple world its security and assures to the earth the freedom of its steady thrust. I guess that the equipment would be distinguished from, say, something you can consume, like food. I guess would not be equipment, because it's not abundant in that sense. You eat it and it's gone. Versus there's an abundance to the peasant shoes, in the sense that they continue performing their function. They're reliable. So in that sense, they're also the earth that safeguards being, and safeguards the world of the peasant woman. So it seems like a strong claim to say world and earth exist for her, and for those who are with her in her mode of being, only thus, in the equipment. Gonna replace the soles of those shoes and the uppers, then give them. we have a Theseus's ship version of the shoes. It is an interesting question actually to ask with that with Heidegger. Like, I mean, maybe he probably did answer it somewhere. Yeah, Theseus peasant shoes. But I don't know actually, at least off the top of my head, what he would say about something like that. Like, what he would say about Theseus's ship. I mean, there's no way he must have written about it somewhere, but I don't know what he would say. He does emphasize the difference between a thing is that it's not replaceable. It's tied to its specific history and period versus, the commodity. He gives the example of a watch that breaks and then you just buy the new watch and it's exactly the same. But that's interesting what he would say if he replaced all the shoes. Yeah. Probably he would say it is just a different shoe, I would guess. Maybe. Since it's not imbued with the world of the woman who wears them. I don't know. That's a difficult question that would be interesting to explore. Yeah, but I guess so. Basically, it's through this equipment, right? I mean, I guess that's a way of keeping it simple. To say that it exists only in the equipment is to say, well, she lives an agrarian lifestyle. If she's able to do that, it's because of the equipment, at least in part. And so that's in what sense her world and her earth exist in her equipment. And he clarifies that later anyway. We say only and therewith fall into error, for the reliability of the equipment first gives to the simple world its security and assures to the earth the freedom of its steady thrust. You start to see in these sentences why certain people who really don't like Heidegger don't like him, because they feel that he starts getting too poetic and metaphorical and not sufficiently philosophical. Or maybe sufficiently philosophical, but just too obscure in his metaphors and poetic writing. Because I don't know what that means, the freedom of its steady thrust. But I think the point is really just to do something that's more like poetry in the sense of capturing, capturing the world of the peasant woman in language. Because the reliability of the equipment gives the world its security, allows the agrarian lifestyle, the agrarian world of the peasant woman to continue to exist. And the earth, the freedom of its steady thrust. I don't know if I know what that means, but yeah, I don't know what it means, to be honest. But I guess the Earth's possibility to, if the Earth is what I'm thinking it is, that it's the kind of possibility space, the particular way that the world unfolds for the peasant woman would not be possible without the shoes. And that could be one thing that it means to say they assure the earth the freedom of its steady thrust, is the freedom for it to continue to be a possibility space. I'm going to have to stop soon because I'm also going to need to. But I do want to finish this, but it's just a little too long. I'll do this is not a great stopping point. I'll go a little bit longer and see if we can find a natural feeling stopping point. The equipmental being of equipment, reliability, keeps gathered within itself all things according to their manner and extent. The usefulness of equipment is nevertheless the less only the essential consequence of reliability. The former vibrates in the latter and would be nothing without it. A single piece of equipment is worn out and used up, but at the same time, the use itself also falls into disuse, wears away, and becomes usual. Thus, equipmentality wastes away, sinks into mere stuff. In such wasting, reliability vanishes. This dwindling, however, to which use things owe their boringly obtrusive usualness, is only one more testimony to the original essence of equipmental being. The worn-out usualness of the equipment then obtrudes itself as the sole mode of being, apparently peculiar to it exclusively. Only blank usefulness now remains visible. It awakens the impression that the origin of equipment lies in a mere fabricating that impresses a form upon some matter. Nevertheless, in its genuinely equipmental being, equipment stems from a more distant source. Matter and form and their distinction have a deeper origin. So this is the sense in which I thought we had already answered the question of what equipment is, but we actually haven't. Because in a certain way, it turns out that equipment is kind of explained by matter and form, but that there's a deeper origin in matter and form. And it makes sense that it's going to go this way, since Heidegger always wants to work back in terms of like we were saying earlier, when Heidegger's problem with the history of philosophy is that these concepts, he thinks, in ancient Greek philosophy were concrete descriptions of that, or concrete attempts at gathering up the real or the concrete experiences of ancient Greek thinkers and people, at that when they became crusted and thrown throughout Western history ever since, they are now just like abstract, concrete, meaningless terms that no longer speak to concrete experience. So he's always trying to take philosophical like jargon and pare it down or work its way back to a meaningful everyday lived experience. And so matter and form, it turns out, get worked back from this kind of, matter and form are abstract ideas, and works its way back to reliability, where reliability is, a much more everyday term, right? And so that's how we end up defining what the equipment is, in truth, is reliability. But he says, okay, well, now we know what equipment is, but we still don't know what the thing is, or even more, which is the whole point. We wanted to know what the work is. We ended up going on a detour to find what the thing is, to know what the work is. But to find what the thing is, we went on another detour to find what equipment is. So we've wasted all our time. Or have we? And now he's going to turn and say, in this process, we actually discovered something about what the thing is and something about what the work is, which is a constant way that Heidegger does things. He emphasizes that thinking is a way path, and that, if you follow thinking exactly as it moves, in fact, you find yourself going on what seem like massive detours that in fact end up getting you back to the thing you're trying to think, right? That'll be a good enough place, I think, to stop there. I can probably talk a little bit more also about reliability tomorrow when I have fresh energy, but I've been going for a while. My mind's starting to dwindle. I also need to eat dinner. So thanks for hanging out, everyone that stopped by, everyone that chatted. And I'll do some more. I'll do some more tomorrow. We'll figure out what the work is. 3 hours of Heidegger, I know. For a second, I was thinking maybe I could hit 4 hours, but no, my brain's dwindling. Yeah, you too, Pesto. Thanks for hanging out. It was a lot of fun. Yeah, I'm gonna get off now, and I'll be back, and I'll be doing more Heidegger tomorrow. Peace.